When I woke up from a 3-month coma, I expected to see my family's relieved faces. Instead, I found my house stripped bare and my children dividing my life's possessions like vultures over carrion. But that was only the beginning of discovering how deep betrayal can cut when it comes from the people you raised with your own hands. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, and at 70 years old, I thought I knew everything about survival. I'd buried a husband, raised 4 children as a single mother, and built a successful antique restoration business from nothing. I'd survived the recession of 2008, cancer in my 60s, and the loneliness that comes with outliving most of your friends. But nothing prepared me for waking up from a coma to discover that my own children had carved up my life like Thanksgiving turkey while I lay fighting for breath. The stroke hit me on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because I was working on a 1920s mahogany secretary desk in my workshop behind the house, the kind of piece that requires patience and reverence. The morning light was streaming through the windows, catching the grain of the wood just right, when suddenly the tools in my hands felt impossibly heavy. The room tilted, colors bled together like watercolors in rain, and then nothing. Nothing for 97 days. St. Catherine's Medical Center became my world for those first critical weeks. The intensive care unit smelled like disinfectant and desperate hope, a combination that seeps into everything until you can taste it in your dreams. Dr. Ramirez, my neurologist, later told me that my brain had swollen so severely that they'd had to drill holes in my skull to relieve the pressure. The technical term was a massive hemorrhagic stroke, but what it meant in plain English was that I was supposed to die. Your recovery is nothing short of miraculous, Mrs. Blackwood, Dr. Ramirez said during one of our final sessions at Riverside Rehabilitation Center. She was a small woman with kind eyes who spoke in measured tones, the way people do when they're used to delivering both devastating news and unexpected hope. When you arrived at St. Catherine says, we gave you less than a 5% chance of survival. The fact that you're walking and talking and remember your own name is remarkable. I was sitting in the physical therapy room, sweat beading on my forehead from the simple act of walking 20 feet with a walker. Everything about my body felt foreign, like I was operating machinery I'd never been trained to use. My left hand shook constantly, my balance was shot, and words sometimes got tangled between my brain and my mouth. But I was alive, and I was stubborn enough to keep fighting. When can I go home? I asked, the same question I'd been asking for weeks. Soon, she said. Your daughter Cassandra has been coordinating with our social services team to make sure the house is ready for your needs. You'll need some modifications, grab bars in the bathroom, a ramp for the front steps, but they've assured us everything is being handled. Cassandra, my eldest at 47, always the responsible one, the one who sent birthday cards on time and remembered to call every Sunday. During my recovery, she'd visited twice a week, bringing updates about the house and my business, assuring me that everything was under control. She'd hired a cleaning service to maintain the property, she said. She'd worked with my accountant to keep the bills current. She'd even handled some business inquiries from customers who wanted to know when I'd be taking new restoration projects. You don't need to worry about anything, Mom, she'd told me just 3 days earlier, patting my hand with the gentle condescension reserved for the elderly and infirm. We're taking care of everything. You just focus on getting better. My other children had visited less frequently. Marcus, my second child at 44, came by every other week, usually bringing his wife Beth and their twin daughters. He owned a struggling auto repair shop in Millbrook and always seemed distracted during visits, checking his phone and talking about parts suppliers and loan payments. Vivian, my 41-year-old daughter, worked as a real estate agent in the city and visited monthly, always impeccably dressed and full of stories about expensive houses and wealthy clients. And Timothy, my baby at 38, showed up sporadically, usually needing money for his latest business venture or asking if I could co-sign for something he claimed would make us both rich. None of them had prepared me for what I would find when Cassandra picked me up on that grey October morning. She arrived at Riverside in a black SUV I'd never seen before, something sleek and expensive that gleamed under the overcast sky. When I commented on it, she waved dismissively and said she'd traded in her old sedan for something more reliable. The monthly payments were steep, she admitted, but the safety features were worth it. The drive to my house in Willowbrook took 45 minutes through rolling hills and past farms that had been in the same families for generations. I'd bought my property 30 years ago, after my husband Charles died, and left me with 4 children and enough life insurance money to make a fresh start. The house was a 1890s Victorian that had been neglected for decades, and I'd spent years restoring it room by room, learning as I went. The 5 acres included a barn I'd converted into my workshop, where I restored antique furniture for clients across the state. Everything looked normal as we turned into my gravel driveway, lined with the oak trees I'd planted when the children were small. The house stood proud and white against the autumn landscape, its gingerbread trim painted deep green, the wraparound porch inviting as always. But something felt wrong before I could even name what it was. The porch swing was gone. For 25 years that swing had hung from the ceiling of the front porch, handcrafted from cherry wood by a local artisan I'd commissioned after Charles died. It was where I'd drunk my morning coffee, where I'd read countless books, where I'd sat with each of my children during their various crises over the years. The chain still hung from the ceiling hooks, but the swing itself had vanished. "Where's my porch swing?" I asked as Cassandra helped me out of the SUV. "Oh, that old thing," she said without meeting my eyes. "It was getting weathered, and we thought it might be dangerous with your balance issues. Vivian mentioned she'd always loved it, so we moved it to her place in the city. She's taking good care of it." Taking good care of it, as if a piece of my home needed to be rescued from me. My key still worked, which seemed like a small miracle given everything else that was about to unfold. But when Cassandra pushed open the front door and stepped aside to let me enter, I felt my legs go weak. My living room was empty, not redecorated or rearranged. Empty. The Chippendale sofa I'd restored to perfection 5 years ago was gone. The matching armchairs were gone. The Queen Anne coffee table that had taken me 3 months to repair was gone. The Persian rug I'd inherited from my mother was gone. Even the mahogany bookcase where I kept my collection of antique reference books had vanished, leaving only pale rectangles on the wallpaper where the furniture had protected the walls from sunlight. "What happened to my furniture?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Cassandra wrung her hands, a gesture I remembered from her childhood, when she'd broken something valuable and was trying to figure out how to explain it. "Mom, we had to make some difficult decisions while you were sick. The medical bills were enormous, and the insurance didn't cover everything. We had to liquidate some assets to keep up with expenses." Liquidate. The word hit me like cold water. They'd liquidated my life. I walked through the house in a daze, Cassandra trailing behind me with explanations that sounded rehearsed. The dining room, where we'd celebrated every holiday for 3 decades, was empty except for a card table and 4 mismatched folding chairs. The mahogany dining set that had belonged to my grandmother was gone, along with the china cabinet and the set of Haviland china I'd been saving for special occasions that would now never come. Marcus needed dining room furniture for his new house, Cassandra explained. His old table was falling apart, and we thought you'd want to help him get established. In the kitchen, my antique Hoosier cabinet was gone, replaced by cheap metal shelving from a discount store. The cabinet had been original to the house, a piece I'd painstakingly restored with period-appropriate hardware and hand-mixed paint. It had been the crown jewel of my kitchen, and now it was gone. Timothy's girlfriend is really into vintage decorating, Cassandra said when I stared at the empty space. She fell in love with the cabinet when she saw it, and Timothy thought it would make a nice housewarming gift for their new apartment. Upstairs was worse. My bedroom had been stripped of everything, except a hospital bed and the single nightstand. The antique 4-poster bed where Charles and I had slept for 15 years was gone. The matching dresser and vanity were gone. Even the rocking chair where I'd nursed each of my babies was nowhere to be seen. We thought the hospital bed would be more practical for your recovery, Cassandra said, her voice getting smaller with each room we visited. And Vivian really needed bedroom furniture for her guest room. She's been sleeping on an air mattress when clients stay over. But the worst devastation was in my workshop. For 30 years I'd built my business in that converted barn, accumulating tools and supplies and reference materials that had cost me thousands of dollars and countless hours of searching. My workbenches were handmade, designed specifically for furniture restoration. My tool collection included pieces I'd inherited from master craftsmen and others I'd saved for years to afford. It was all gone. The barn was empty except for some cardboard boxes stacked in one corner and a few broken pieces of furniture that weren't worth stealing. Marcus needed tools for his shop, Cassandra said, her voice barely audible now, and Timothy starting a furniture flipping business. We thought you'd want to help them succeed. I stood in the empty barn, where I'd built my life's work, and felt something inside me crack like old wood under pressure. This wasn't just theft, this was erasure. They'd erased 30 years of my professional life, 30 years of building something beautiful and meaningful with my own hands. Where are my client files? I asked. Cassandra looked confused. What client files? My business records, customer information, work orders, receipts, 30 years of documentation. Oh, she said, suddenly very interested in her shoes. We cleaned out the office area. Most of it looked like old paperwork, so we assumed it wasn't important. They'd thrown away my business, literally thrown it away like garbage. That evening, after Cassandra left with promises to bring groceries the next day, I sat at the card table in what used to be my dining room and tried to process what I'd discovered. The silence in the house was absolute. No familiar creaks and sighs from furniture that had lived here for decades. No ticking from the mantel clock my mother had given me as a wedding gift. I called my bank to check my accounts, navigating through the automated system with growing dread. When I finally reached a human being, I learned that my savings account, which had contained $68,000 before my stroke, now held less than $3,000. Your daughter Cassandra has been handling your affairs with the power of attorney, the bank representative explained. She's been very diligent about paying your medical expenses and property taxes. Would you like me to send you a detailed statement? What power of attorney? I asked. The one filed on March 15th, 3 days after your admission to St. Catherine's. It gives her full authority to manage your financial affairs during your incapacitation. 3 days. They'd waited 3 days after my stroke to seize control of my money. I hung up and called my lawyer, Jonathan Hartwell, who'd handled my affairs for 15 years. His secretary informed me that he'd retired 6 months ago and transferred all his files to a younger associate. When I finally reached the new lawyer, David Chen, he confirmed what I already suspected. Yes, Mrs. Blackwood, I have the power of attorney documents here. Very straightforward, properly notarized and witnessed. Your daughter Cassandra brought them in personally, along with the hospital documentation of your condition. I never signed any power of attorney documents, I said. There was a pause. Mrs. Blackwood, I have your signature right here, witnessed by 2 nurses from St. Catherine's ICU. I was unconscious. I was in a coma. Another pause, longer this time. I think we need to schedule a meeting to discuss this in person. After I hung up, I sat in my empty house and tried to understand how my children had transformed from the people I'd raised into strangers who could strip my life bare while I fought for survival. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made for them, all the times I'd gone without so they could have what they needed. I'd worked 16-hour days to pay for their college educations. I'd co-signed loans for Marcus's shop and Timothy's failed restaurant. I'd given Vivian the down payment for her first apartment and helped Cassandra through her divorce. And this was how they repaid me. I found a notebook in the kitchen junk drawer, one of the few things they'd left untouched, and started making a list of everything that was missing. The list grew to 5 pages before I stopped writing, my hand cramping from the effort. Furniture, tools, artwork, collectibles, business equipment, even my late husband's watch collection. They'd taken everything that had any value, leaving me with the shell of a house and enough money to survive for maybe 6 months. But as I wrote, I realized this wasn't just about missing possessions or stolen money. This was about trust betrayed so completely that I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. My children had looked at my unconscious body and seen an opportunity instead of their mother fighting for her life. The next morning, Cassandra returned with groceries and a forced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. She bustled around the kitchen, putting away supplies and chattering about how good it was to have me home. I brought your favorite cookies, she said, holding up a package of store-bought chocolate chips. And I got plenty of easy meals you can heat up in the microwave. She'd been buying my groceries for 30 years and had never once purchased store-bought cookies. I made my own, had taught her the recipe when she was 12, but my mixer was gone, along with all my baking supplies and the recipe box my mother had left me. Where's my recipe box? I asked. Oh, Mom, most of those recipes were so old-fashioned, nobody cooks like that anymore. I think we donated it to the church rummage sale. Donated? They donated my mother's recipes to strangers. I want to see the power of attorney documents, I said. Cassandra's smile faltered. Mom, you shouldn't worry about paperwork right now. You need to focus on your recovery. I want to see them today. I'll have to dig them out of my files at home, maybe this weekend. Today, Cassandra. She left without bringing the documents. That afternoon I called Marcus's auto shop. When he answered, his voice was distracted, the sound of machinery humming in the background. Mom, how are you feeling? Cassandra said, you're adjusting well to being home. Where's my dining room set, Marcus? A pause. What do you mean? My grandmother's mahogany dining set, the one you apparently needed for your new house. Oh, that. Mom, we thought you'd want to help us get settled. The old card table we had was falling apart, and Beth was embarrassed to have people over. I want it back. Mom, that's not really practical. We've arranged our whole dining room around it, and moving furniture is expensive. It's my furniture, Marcus. In my grandmother's house. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. The doctor said stroke patients sometimes have difficulty processing change. Give it time. He hung up before I could respond. I called Vivian next. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright and professional. Mother darling, how are you adjusting? I've been meaning to call, but I've been showing houses all week. I want my porch swing back. What porch swing? The cherry wood swing that's been on my front porch for 25 years. The one that's now apparently decorating your apartment. Oh that, Mother, it was getting so weathered, and we thought it might not be safe with your balance issues. It looks beautiful on my balcony, and my clients always comment on how charming it is. It's not supposed to charm your clients, Vivian. It's supposed to be on my porch. Mother, you're being unreasonable. We made these decisions for your own good while you were sick. You should be grateful we took care of everything, instead of letting it fall apart. Grateful? I should be grateful that my children had stolen my life. Timothy was the hardest to reach. His phone went straight to voicemail, and when he finally called back 2 days later, he was defensive before I even asked a question. Mom, I know you're upset about some of the changes, but we saved your life by taking care of business while you were sick. The medical bills would have bankrupted you if we hadn't made some hard choices. Where are my tools, Timothy? I'm using them to start my furniture business. I thought you'd be proud that I'm finally following in your footsteps. Those tools represent 30 years of collecting and thousands of dollars of investment. You can't just take them. Mom, you can't use them anymore anyway. Your hands shake and you can barely walk. We thought it made sense to keep the tools in the family instead of selling them to strangers. I never said I couldn't use them anymore. Be realistic, Mom. You're 70 years old, and you just had a massive stroke. Your furniture restoration days are over. According to my youngest child, my life was over. That night, I lay in the hospital bed that had replaced my antique four-poster and stared at the ceiling. The house felt hollow, not just because it was empty, but because the love I'd believed connected our family had been revealed as an illusion. My children had spent years watching me build something beautiful and meaningful, and the moment I was vulnerable, they'd destroyed it for their own benefit. But as I lay there in the darkness, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the stroke. Anger, not the helpless rage of an invalid, but the cold, purposeful anger of a woman who'd survived everything life could throw at her, and wasn't about to be finished off by her own children. I'd spent 30 years learning how to restore broken things. Now it was time to see if I could restore justice. The next morning, I called David Chen, the lawyer who'd inherited my files, and scheduled an appointment. Then I called my old friend Margaret Thornley, who'd been the county clerk for 20 years before retiring. If anyone knew how to trace documents and follow paper trails, it was Margaret. "Eleanor, dear," she said, when I explained what had happened. "That's terrible, but it's not uncommon, unfortunately. I've seen families do terrible things when they smell inheritance money. Can you help me figure out what really happened while I was unconscious?" "Oh, honey, I can do better than that. I still have friends in all the right offices. Let me make some calls." I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote "investigation" at the top. Under that, I listed everyone I needed to talk to and every document I needed to see. If my children thought a 70-year-old stroke survivor was too weak to fight back, they were about to learn just how wrong they could be. Because this wasn't just about furniture and tools and empty bank accounts. This was about the difference between the people who tear down and the people who build up. My children had chosen to be destroyers. Now it was time to show them what a builder could do when she set her mind to reconstruction. And that was only the beginning. 3 weeks after discovering my children had stolen my life, I sat in lawyer David Chen's office with a stack of documents that would destroy my family forever. But sometimes destruction is the only path to justice, and I'd learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty when money is involved. Margaret Thornley had been more thorough than I'd dared hope. My old friend had spent decades navigating county records and legal documents, and she'd used every connection she'd built to uncover the truth about what my children had done while I lay unconscious. "Eleanor," David Chen said, spreading the papers across his mahogany desk, "what your friend discovered is worse than simple power of attorney abuse. This is organized fraud." I leaned forward in my chair, my left hand still trembling slightly from the stroke, but my mind sharp as the day I'd first learned to restore antique wood. "Show me." He picked up the first document. "This is the power of attorney your daughter Cassandra filed 3 days after your stroke. The signature is a forgery. I've compared it to documents you signed in this office over the years, and it's not even a good forgery." My chest tightened, but not from my heart condition, from rage. They forged my signature while I was fighting for my life. It gets worse. The witnesses listed are allegedly 2 ICU nurses from St. Catherine's. I called the hospital. Neither nurse was working that day. In fact, one of them had quit 6 months earlier and moved to Arizona. He handed me another document. "This is a bill of sale for your workshop equipment, dated 1 week after your stroke. According to this, you sold everything to Timothy for $500. $500. My tools alone were worth $15,000. And this," he continued, lifting a thick folder, "is a series of property transfers. Your children didn't just steal your belongings. They systematically transferred ownership of everything valuable you owned to themselves, using forged documents." Margaret shifted in her chair beside me. At 75, she was still sharp as a tack, her grey hair pulled back in the same no-nonsense bun she'd worn for 40 years. "Tell her about the bank accounts, David." Chen nodded grimly. "Your daughter Cassandra didn't just drain your savings account for medical bills. She opened 3 new accounts in your name and transferred money between them to make the withdrawals look legitimate. Then she closed those accounts and kept the money." "How much?" I asked. $68,000 from your main savings, plus another $12,000 from your business account that they emptied completely. They left you with just enough to keep the utilities on and pay property taxes. $80,000 gone. "But here's the most damaging evidence," Chen said, pulling out a manila envelope. "Margaret found this in the county recorder's office, filed 6 weeks after your stroke." He handed me a document that made my blood turn cold. It was a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of my 5-acre property from Eleanor Blackwood to Cassandra Blackwood Morrison, Vivian Blackwood Sterling, Marcus Blackwood, and Timothy Blackwood. According to the document, I'd given my children my house and land for $1. "They stole my property," I whispered. "They tried to," Margaret said, "but they made a mistake. The notary they used wasn't licensed in this county, and the filing was done incorrectly. The deed is invalid, but it shows clear intent to defraud." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of my children's betrayal. This wasn't desperation or poor judgment. This was calculated theft, planned and executed while I was unconscious and helpless. "What are my options?" I asked. Chen leaned forward. "Criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse, civil suits to recover your property and money, and we can file for immediate injunctions to prevent them from selling or transferring anything else. What about getting my things back? That's more complicated. If they've sold items to third parties, those sales might be legally valid, even though the original theft wasn't. But we can force them to compensate you for the value of what they took." I thought about my grandmother's dining set in Marcus's house, my porch swing on Vivian's balcony, my workshop tools scattered among Timothy's possessions. Some things could be replaced with money. Others were gone forever. How long will this take? Criminal charges could be filed within days. Civil recovery might take months or years, depending on how hard they fight. But Eleanor, you need to understand something. If we pursue this, your relationship with your children will be destroyed permanently. There's no coming back from accusing them of felony fraud. I looked at Margaret, who'd been watching me with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd seen families implode over far less money than this. "What would you do?" I asked her. "Honey, I've watched children steal from their parents for 20 years. The ones who do it once do it again. If you don't stop them now, they'll come back for whatever's left when you're truly helpless." She was right. My children had shown me who they were when they thought I couldn't fight back. If I forgave them now, I'd be teaching them that my love could be purchased with crocodile tears and empty apologies. "File the charges," I said. Chen nodded. "I'll contact the district attorney's office this afternoon. But Eleanor, you should prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly." 3 days later, sheriff's deputies arrested Cassandra at her office, Marcus at his auto shop, Vivian at a house showing, and Timothy at his apartment. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page: 4 siblings charged in $80,000 elder fraud case. The phone started ringing immediately. The first call was from Cassandra, crying and begging me to drop the charges. "Mom, this is all a misunderstanding. We were trying to help you. We never meant to hurt you." I hung up without responding. Marcus called next, angry and defensive. "Mom, you're destroying our family over money. Is that really what you want? To be the bitter old woman who sent her own children to prison?" "I want to be the woman who taught her children that actions have consequences," I said, and hung up. Vivian's call came that evening. Her real estate agent smoothness replaced by barely controlled panic. "Mother, my career is ruined. Do you understand that? I'll lose my license, my clients, everything I've worked for, like you destroyed everything I worked for while I was unconscious. That's different. We thought you were going to die, so you decided to help me along by stealing my life." Timothy was the last to call, and his voice was small and defeated. "Mom, I can't go to prison. I've got a record from that DUI 5 years ago. They'll throw the book at me." For a moment I felt the old maternal instinct to protect him, to fix his problems like I'd been doing his whole life. Then I remembered my empty workshop, and my grandmother's stolen furniture, and my mother's recipes thrown away like garbage. "You should have thought about that before you forged my signature and stole my tools," I said. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for November. Chen filed civil suits to recover my property and money, and obtained injunctions preventing my children from selling or disposing of anything they'd taken. Within a week he'd frozen their bank accounts and placed liens on their homes. "We're fighting on two fronts now," he explained. "Criminal charges for the fraud, and civil recovery for your losses. The criminal case sends them to prison. The civil case gets your money back." But the real battle was just beginning. My children hired lawyers, good ones, expensive ones that I was indirectly paying for with the money they'd stolen from me. Their defense strategy became clear during the first court hearing. Paint me as a bitter, confused old woman suffering from stroke-related dementia, who'd forgotten giving them permission to manage my affairs. Cassandra's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Vance, stood before the judge and spoke with practiced sympathy. "Your Honor, Mrs. Blackwood suffered a massive stroke that severely impacted her cognitive function. Her children made difficult decisions to save her life and preserve her assets during a medical crisis. Now, sadly, she's forgotten the conversations they had about managing her affairs and is lashing out at the people who saved her. It was a good strategy, elegant, simple, completely false, but difficult to disprove." The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Rodriguez, countered with the forensic evidence. "Your Honor, the handwriting analysis clearly shows forgery. The hospital records prove the alleged witnesses weren't present. This isn't a case of family misunderstanding. This is systematic fraud." Judge Patricia Holloway, a stern woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and no tolerance for nonsense, listened to both sides before speaking. "This court will not make decisions based on speculation about anyone's mental capacity. We will examine the evidence and determine whether crimes were committed. I'm ordering cognitive evaluations for Mrs. Blackwood to establish her competency as a witness." The cognitive evaluation took 3 hours and covered everything from my ability to remember recent events to my understanding of financial concepts. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neuropsychologist, tested my memory, reasoning and judgment with a battery of standardized assessments. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said when we finished, "I want you to know that your cognitive function is well within normal limits for someone your age. The stroke affected your motor control and caused some speech difficulties, but your memory and reasoning are sharp. You show no signs of dementia or significant cognitive impairment." When the results were presented in court 2 weeks later, Cassandra's lawyer tried a different approach. "Your Honor, even if Mrs. Blackwood is cognitively intact now, we maintain that her children acted in good faith based on medical advice they received while she was critically ill." Rodriguez stood to respond. "Your Honor, the defendants never spoke to any doctors about Mrs. Blackwood's prognosis. Hospital records show no communication between medical staff and her children regarding financial decisions. They simply forged documents and began stealing her property." The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged signatures, fake witnesses, invalid notarizations. My children had been thorough in their theft, but sloppy in covering their tracks. As the case progressed, the local community began taking sides. Some people sympathized with my children, believing that family disputes should be handled privately. Others were horrified by what they'd done and expressed support for my decision to press charges. Margaret accompanied me to every hearing, her presence a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor," she told me after a particularly difficult day in court. "These children of yours need to learn that being family doesn't give them license to steal. The breaking point came during Marcus's testimony. Dressed in an ill-fitting suit and sweating under the courtroom lights, he took the stand and swore to tell the truth. Then he proceeded to lie about everything. "My mother asked us to handle her affairs," he said, avoiding eye contact with me. "She was worried about the medical bills and wanted us to sell some furniture to cover expenses." Rodriguez cross-examined him with surgical precision. "Mr. Blackwood, when exactly did your unconscious mother ask you to sell her furniture?" "Before the stroke. She'd mentioned it several times." "And when did she ask you to forge power of attorney documents?" "We didn't forge anything. We found the documents in her desk." Rodriguez held up the handwriting analysis. "This expert testimony shows clear evidence of forgery." "Are you saying the expert is wrong?" "I'm saying we acted in good faith. Is transferring $80,000 from your mother's accounts to your own accounts acting in good faith?" Marcus's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. "My son was clearly lying under oath, and everyone in the courtroom could see it." When Cassandra testified, she tried a different approach. Tears flowed freely as she described the trauma of watching her mother near death and the desperate decisions they'd made to save the family home. "We never meant to hurt her," she sobbed. "We thought we were protecting her assets for when she recovered." "By forging her signature?" Rodriguez asked. "We panicked. The bills were piling up, and we didn't know what else to do. So you decided to steal her life savings. We were protecting her by transferring her property to yourselves." Cassandra had no answer for that. Vivian's testimony was coldly professional, a real estate agent trying to sell a story no one was buying. She claimed they'd acted on legal advice from an attorney whose name she couldn't remember and couldn't produce any records of consulting. Timothy didn't testify. His lawyer advised him to remain silent rather than risk perjuring himself. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of watching my children lie under oath, of hearing them portray themselves as victims, of listening to their lawyers paint me as a vindictive old woman punishing her family for trying to help. But the evidence spoke louder than their lies. Judge Holloway read the verdict on a cold December morning. The courtroom was packed with curious neighbors and local reporters who'd been following the case. "On the charges of elder abuse, fraud and forgery," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "I find all 4 defendants guilty." The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. Chen explained that my children faced potential prison terms ranging from 2 to 10 years depending on their individual roles in the fraud. "Cassandra organized everything, so she'll likely get the harshest sentence," he said. "The others might get lighter terms if they show remorse and cooperate with restitution, but none of them showed remorse. Even after conviction they maintained their innocence and blamed me for destroying the family." On sentencing day, Judge Holloway spoke directly to my children before announcing their punishment. "You took advantage of your mother's vulnerability during a life-threatening medical crisis. You forged documents, stole money and attempted to defraud an elderly woman of her life's work. This court has rarely seen such a calculated betrayal of family trust." Cassandra received 5 years in state prison. Marcus got 3 years. Vivian received 2 years plus community service. Timothy, as the youngest and least culpable, got 18 months and probation. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, none of my children looked at me. Not one of them met my eyes or offered an apology. But the legal victory was only half the battle. The civil case took another 8 months to resolve. Chen's team tracked down most of my stolen property and forced my children to return what they still owned. The dining room set came back from Marcus's house, along with several pieces of workshop equipment. Vivian had to return my porch swing and pay damages for items she'd sold. Timothy was ordered to return my tools or compensate me for their value. In the end, I recovered about 60% of what they'd stolen. Some items had been sold to strangers and couldn't be retrieved. Others had been damaged or lost. My business records were gone forever, destroyed when they cleaned out my office. The house felt different when I finally moved my furniture back into place. Everything was where it belonged, but the meaning had changed. These weren't just possessions anymore. They were evidence of survival, proof that I'd fought back against betrayal and won. Margaret helped me reorganize my workshop when the last of my tools were returned. Many were damaged, some were missing, but I had enough to begin working again. "Are you really going to start taking restoration jobs again?" she asked, watching me test an old plane that had been chipped during Timothy's furniture business. "Why wouldn't I? Eleanor, you're 70 years old and you just went through hell. Maybe it's time to slow down." I looked around my workshop, at the tools I'd rescued from my own children, at the workbenches I'd built with my own hands. "Margaret, I spent 30 years building something beautiful. My children tried to destroy it while I was helpless. If I stop now, they win." 3 months later, I took my first new restoration job in almost a year. A 1920s secretary desk, similar to the one I'd been working on when the stroke hit. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I worked running my hands over the damaged wood and planning its restoration, I thought about the difference between destruction and construction. My children had chosen to tear down everything I'd built. They'd seen my vulnerability as an opportunity to take rather than give. But I'd chosen differently. I'd chosen to rebuild, to restore, to create something beautiful from the wreckage they'd left behind. The strokes had weakened my body and my children's betrayal had wounded my heart. But neither had broken my spirit. I was still Eleanor Blackwood, still the woman who could take something broken and make it whole again. The phone rang as I was applying finish to the restored desk. It was a new customer, asking if I could repair a damaged china cabinet that had been in her family for generations. "I can fix it," I told her, looking around my rebuilt workshop. "I specialize in making broken things beautiful again. Because that's what I do. I restore things. And sometimes the most important thing you can restore is yourself." My children were in prison, our family was destroyed, and I was 70 years old and starting over. But I was alive, I was free, and I was surrounded by the tools and furniture I'd fought to reclaim. Justice had been served. Not the gentle justice of forgiveness and reconciliation that families are supposed to practice, but the hard justice of courts and consequences. My children had learned that love without respect is worthless, and that family bonds can't survive the weight of calculated betrayal. As I locked up my workshop that evening and walked back to my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of a battle fought and won. I'd survived a stroke, exposed a conspiracy, fought my own children in court, and rebuilt my life from the ashes of their betrayal. I'd learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you've loved longest, and that forgiveness isn't always the answer. Sometimes justice is the answer. Sometimes consequences are the answer. Sometimes walking away from toxic people is the answer, even when those people are your own children. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my restored porch swing, watching the sun set over the land I'd fought to keep. Tomorrow I'd start work on the china cabinet. Next week I had 2 more projects lined up. My business was growing again, built on the foundation of my reputation for bringing damaged things back to life. My children had taught me an important lesson during their trial. They'd shown me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resilient than I'd known, and capable of surviving anything life threw at me. They'd intended to destroy me. Instead, they'd shown me just how indestructible I really was. And that was a gift I never expected to receive from the children who tried to steal everything I'd ever built. 2 years after the trial ended, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret knocked on my door on a crisp spring morning, holding a manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone carrying important news. "Eleanor, you need to see this," she said, settling into my kitchen chair and opening the envelope. "It's from the state prison." My heart tightened. What now? Cassandra's being released early for good behavior. She'll be out next month. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. After all this time, the thought of seeing my eldest daughter again filled me with a mixture of dread and something I couldn't quite name. "There's more," Margaret continued. "She's been writing letters to you. The prison chaplain has been holding them, waiting to see if you wanted to receive them. 23 letters. That's how many Cassandra had written over 18 months. I read them all in one sitting, watching the progression from anger to bargaining to what seemed like genuine remorse. The final letter was different from the others. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable, and I understand if you never want to see me again. But I want you to know that every day in here, I think about what I destroyed. Not just your furniture or your money, but your trust, your love for us, the family you worked so hard to build. I can't undo what I did, but I can promise you this: I will spend the rest of my life trying to become the daughter you deserve to have. Not because I expect anything from you, but because it's the right thing to do. I love you, Mom." I know those words probably sound hollow after everything, but they're true. They've always been true. 3 weeks later, I drove to the prison for her release. I didn't know why I went. Curiosity, maybe. Or the stubborn hope that somewhere inside the woman who'd betrayed me was still the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike. Cassandra looked smaller than I remembered, her hair streaked with gray, her face marked by the weight of consequences. When she saw me waiting by my car, she stopped walking and just stared. "Mom," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Get in," I said. We drove in silence for 20 minutes before she spoke again. "I never expected you to come." "I didn't expect to come either." We stopped at a diner outside town, one of those places with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like it's been brewing since 1975. Cassandra ordered toast she didn't eat. I watched her hands shake as she reached for her water glass. "I want to pay you back," she said. "Every penny. I know it won't fix anything, but it's a start. With what money? I'll find a way. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to." I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize, but all I saw was exhaustion and what looked like genuine shame. "The money doesn't matter anymore," I said. "Then what does?" That was the question I'd been asking myself for 2 years. What did matter? Justice had been served, my possessions had been returned, my business was thriving again. But something was still missing. "Trust," I said finally. "Trust matters. And trust isn't something you can pay back in installments. Cassandra nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. I know, but maybe I can earn it. Not your trust in who I was, but trust in who I'm trying to become. 6 months later, she was true to her word. She found work as a night janitor at an office building, took a weekend job stocking shelves at a grocery store, and lived in a tiny apartment above a hardware store. Every month she sent me a check for $50 with a note explaining how she was doing. The checks weren't about the money, they were about accountability, about showing up consistently, even when it was hard. I didn't cash them at first, but eventually I started putting them in a savings account, not for me, but for her, for the day when she might need help getting back on her feet completely. The other children never contacted me. Marcus finished his sentence and moved to another state. Vivian lost her real estate license and disappeared entirely. Timothy got out early, but never called or wrote. Only Cassandra tried to rebuild what she'd broken. It took 3 years before I invited her to Sunday dinner. 3 years of monthly checks, weekly phone calls, and gradual proof that people can change if they're willing to do the work. You don't have to forgive me, she said that first Sunday, sitting at my restored dining room table. I just want you to know that I'm grateful for the chance to try. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a switch you flip. It's a door you open slowly, carefully, ready to close it again if necessary. But trust can be rebuilt, one honest conversation at a time. Today Cassandra runs a small cleaning business and visits every other Sunday. We talk about her work, my restoration projects, the weather. We don't talk about the trial or the betrayal, or the years we lost. Some wounds heal better when you don't keep examining them. The other children are strangers to me now, and perhaps that's how it should be. Not everyone deserves unlimited chances to hurt you, even if they share your blood. But sometimes one person finds their way back from the darkness. Sometimes redemption is possible. Sometimes the most beautiful restoration project is a relationship you thought was broken beyond repair. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember that forgiveness is a choice, but so is protecting yourself. Choose wisely.